Churchill Downs shuts down, Forte stumbles again, and more on this episode of the Win Place Show.
Today's video is brought to you by Assiniboia Downs Gaming and Event Center. And be sure to tune in to Trust the Profits Live Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern for Monday Night Lights, hosted by Matthew DeSantis.
Salutations and welcome, friends, to this episode of the Win Place Show here on Trust the Profits. I'm your host, Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Well, before we get started into this jam-packed episode of the Win Place Show with tons of horse racing news, race recaps, a lot of stuff going on in the sport right now, off track, on track news, etc. Make sure to press that subscribe button here on Trust the Profits to get all of your horse racing coverage that you might be looking for throughout the Triple Crown season into the summer. We're almost done with the Triple Crown run, right? The Belmont's coming up this Saturday, but after that, we're still going to be coming at you every single week with tons of content, live streams on Monday and Thursday evenings, the Monday Night Lights live stream with the Assiniboia Downs, always a lot of fun. But listen, we're going to have weekly Win Place Show. We're still going to have weekly Capping the Card, weekly Doubling Down, tons of graded stakes previews from Haskell to up at Saratoga this summer, to the Pennsylvania Derby in the fall, to the Keeneland Fall Meet, to the Breeders' Cup, etc. We got a lot of content for you here on Trust the Profits, so press that subscribe button. Additionally, press the like button and let me know what was your biggest story from the past week, and I think that's going to be kind of a slam dunk, but also let me know which horse's performance from this past week that maybe stood out the most for you. All right, well, like I said, let's dive into what is a jam-packed week in racing. And I joked with somebody the other day. I said, can we just have a normal 3-day stretch in this sport? And it honestly does not feel like that's going to be possible for quite some time. Obviously, the big news that we're going to lead off with, and we're going to hit on the Belmont because there's some very important Belmont news that we're going to get to. Talk a little bit about the Friday fields that have already been released, the Acorn, the Just a Game fields. So we'll be talking about those a little bit later on in the episode. But obviously, starting with the big news, Churchill Downs releasing a statement Friday evening, nothing quite like a Friday news dump, but Friday evening, releasing a statement that they are going to cease operations and racing. I should just say cease racing, not operations, cease racing at Churchill Downs after this past weekend. So June 4th will be the last day of racing. And starting on June 10th, all races that were scheduled to be run at Churchill Downs will now run at Ellis Park. Of course, Ellis Park was the next track up in the Kentucky circuit. They were going to start their meet in July, so they obviously need to get prepared, need a little bit of time to get ready, and particularly the turf course ready for all the horses coming in from Churchill Downs. But this was obviously in response to the rash of horse deaths that had taken place at Churchill Downs over the previous months. 12 horse deaths in total, two of them dying from heart attacks, basically, one dying from a paddock accident, and 9 dying from catastrophic injuries suffered either training or on the track in a race. And again, that happened on the dirt and the turf track, different parts of the dirt track. So Churchill Downs came out and said, we're going to shut down racing and move to Ellis Park based upon the recommendation of HISA, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. That was a big deal, obviously, because there had been a series of tests done on the surface. That was a big question that I think a lot of us were asking. Is there a problem with the surface? Churchill Downs still says no. There's no issue with the surface. We've not found anything that would suggest the surface is the culprit in any of these breakdowns and deaths that ended up taking place at the track. However, out of an abundance of caution, we are going to suspend racing. We're going to do a top-to-bottom review of everything, policies, procedures, the track, etc. They're going to do a more in-depth analysis of the track as well. Now, listen, this is something that I think a lot of us had called for. Myself and El Hombre did a kind of a quick emergency reaction video on Friday evening once the news broke. Obviously, the number one thing here is the safety of the horses. That's something that I will always come back to time and time and time again. I will say, after last week's episode, I was pleasantly surprised, perhaps, at the number of people who reached out to me privately. Some people saying, Matthew, thank you for saying something. Other people saying, Matthew, watch out. Churchill Downs might be coming for you. And other people who are associated with Churchill Downs, or associated, I should say, more with Kentucky racing, reaching out to me and saying, listen, there's things happening behind the scenes that you don't know about. There's a lot of concern here at Churchill for all of this. There were machinations taking place even before this obviously very serious announcement to cease racing operations and shift to Ellis Park. I'm thrilled that Churchill has been taking this seriously behind the scenes for quite some time. However, I've always felt that there needs to be a more proactive public approach and outreach in all of this situation. And part of that is public education about what this sport does and the realities of horse deaths in America that have been trending down pretty precipitously for the last 10 years. And also explaining the nature of horses, that horses are very fragile creatures, and that if they suffer any sort of an injury to their legs, whether they're racing or not, racing doesn't create that problem. It may exacerbate things at times. The way in which our sport has been breeding, the way in which our sport maybe is reliant on certain medications or switching on and off those medications. I know a lot of people are pointing to the on and off Lasix and kind of constantly yo-yoing horses between those, between that substance being on and off as being perhaps a contributing factor in some of these instances. In any event, a lot of things obviously going on. We had to be a little bit more public about it, I feel like, as a sport. Now, listen, there are some people who go, this is all just a PR move. This is all just a dog and pony show. Churchill should not have shut things down. It gives the wrong impression. It gives credence to the people who are screaming the loudest that something was wrong and something needed to be done. I get their argument on a certain level, and on a certain level, they might be right, because training is going to continue at Churchill Downs. Horses are going to continue to be stabled at Churchill Downs. So it's not as if there's not going to be horses on the track on a daily basis. There it seems like there will be, because they're not moving all of the barns to Ellis Park. They're going to be transporting horses there temporarily and then moving them back to Churchill, etc. So there's a lot of logistics that goes into this. Jockeys are going to have to obviously make the commute to Ellis Park or relocate. Trainers, same sort of thing, grooms, assistant trainers, the whole operations of moving from Louisville to Ellis Park is, it's a 150-mile commute. I mean, that's nothing to, that's pretty serious in terms of just suddenly shifting operations. One of the things that I will say, and I understand that people who have been in power for long periods of time and institutions that have been in power for long periods of time do not like being questioned about their authority on a matter. They do not like being told what to do. This is true outside of horse. This has nothing to do with horse racing. When I talk about that, you could talk about the corporate world. You can talk about politics. You can talk about business. You can talk about sports in general, not just horse racing. You can talk about, religion. You could talk about that in every aspect of life. Institutions that have been in control of a particular sector or area or industry for decades and century do not like being questioned on their authority and do not like being questioned, particularly by the uninformed public, on their authority. That I can most definitely understand. It can be frustrating. And I say that as someone who taught political science for the better part of 15 years. When I had my authority questioned regularly, when I would sit there and I just in casual conversation explain something to someone and they go, "Why is this happening?" And I would kind of explain it, and not from a ideological standpoint, but more of, this is why it's happening and this is why things work the way they do, etc. And then they go, "Well, I don't think that's true." It's like, okay, well, it is, but I'm glad you don't think that. And I don't know why you don't think that, but great. That's the answer. But all right, fine. You go and reach whatever conclusion you would like with your own information that you've, discovered on the internet and YouTube. So I totally get it on a certain level. At the same time, the institutions that have been in control of horse racing for the last 50 years have overseen a precipitous decline in the sport. So I'm not really sure that they have the credibility in the eyes of the public and the credibility in the eyes of many of us who are horse players to sit there and go, no, you all are wrong. Just don't worry about it. Let us do our thing. You don't know what you're talking about. That's the sort of hand-waving, yada, yada attitude that a lot of us take are taken aback by in some instances, because it has precipitated a decline in the sport in a lot of other instances within this industry, in terms of how we educate bettors, the sort of products that we're putting out, the sort of, the proliferation of stakes races, which we're going to get to a little bit later in the episode. So I get it from both ends. I understand why institutions that have been in control for decades don't like to be questioned by an uninformed public. I also get that the public goes, what exactly have you done that's so spectacular over the last 50 years? Because this sport has gone from one of the most popular in the nation to one of the most reviled, and you've been in charge this entire time. So why exactly should we be paying attention to you on anything? This is where we're at. This is why there's a very contentious back and forth when these sorts of things happen. And we need to realize we live in the 21st century, and we need to realize as an industry that we just can't plug our ears and stick our head in the sand and yada, yada people. We need to demand answers, particularly when the general public starts to focus their attention on it. Listen, horse racing, they can hand wave us bettors. They can hand wave the horse players a lot. But when the general public, when politicians start getting involved, you just can't hand wave those people anymore. And that's when you have to take action. You have to just be more proactive, and you have to be more nimble about how to deal with it. I applaud Churchill for taking the action that they did, which is dramatic, absolutely, and unprecedented. But it is one that I think will make a big impression in the general public that we are serious about this. We'll obviously have to wait and see what the final reports are going to be, but certainly something to keep in mind that I wanted to start off with in the top of this episode. Now, we also had a lot of updates going up to New York at Belmont, even though the Saturday card for the Belmont is not going to be drawn until Tuesday at 11 a.m. So we're going to have tons of content here for you on the channel. We already do. We already have our spotlight series where myself and El Hombre are talking about different horses that are going to be entered in this year's Belmont Stakes, and we have a pretty good sense of who those 10 horses are already. But we did have obviously a lot of news coming out of Belmont over the weekend as it regards to the Saturday and Friday cards. So the Friday card featuring the Acorn Stakes, which is obviously for the 3-year-old fillies, as well as the Just a Game, one of the top turf races in the country for 4-year-old and ups. We're going to be talking about both of those, but news also broke on Sunday that according to Bob Baffert, one of his top runners, Taba, is not, I repeat, not going to go to the Metropolitan Mile. That was the assumption, that Taba was going to be slated for the Met Mile, but no longer. According to Bob Baffert, Taba has not been showing his A game while training, and he felt that that was going to be necessary if he was going to ship the horse in for the Belmont, or for the Met Mile, I should say. The horse is going to remain in California and looks to be pointed towards a stakes race at Del Mar later this summer. So something certainly to keep in mind. That takes a little bit of pizzazz out of the Met Mile, although I would say it still has a lot of really intriguing horses led by, obviously, the presumed morning line favorite, which is going to be Cody's Wish, the Bill Mott horse that I think America has largely fallen in love with because of the story associated with the young man connected with the horse. And so Cody Gorman, and that's obviously a very heartfelt story, and a very touching story that was shared during the Breeders' Cup about the connection between the boy and the horse. And so Cody's Wish is going to be your morning line favorite in all probability. But you also have Zandon coming back from a long layoff for Chad Brown. I've seen some photos of him, some video of him. He looks like he's bulked up quite a bit from his 3-year-old year. It looks like he's really kind of matured and filled out a little bit more. Excited to see him. I'll still never forget standing in the paddock area at Parks on Pennsylvania Derby Day, and he walked in, and a woman next to me who I didn't know just gasped and said, "That's the most beautiful horse I've ever seen." And he is a stunning horse when you see him in person. I mean, that black, beautiful black horse, and he is a sight to behold when you see him. I mean, he really is a gorgeous, gorgeous animal. And but it looks like he physically has matured the right type of way. So I'll be interested to see Zandon there. White Abario, obviously, we talked about the shift to being trained by Rick Dutrow now, who we should mention got his Kentucky trainer's license after that 10-year suspension had concluded. And listen, I was very harsh on the trainer change from Safi to Dutrow last week. I still am hard on that trainer change from a PR standpoint. I just don't like it. That said, I saw some people saying Rick Dutrow shouldn't get a trainer's license in Kentucky. And to that, I would say, well, no, I don't like that. The man served a suspension. He should be allowed, as long as he's fulfilling protocols now and following policies and rules. Why would he not be able to come back into the sport and get a trainer's license? That is, you serve your penalty. You are allowed to come back into the sport now. And, in many ways, I see it similar to something like Michael Vick when he served his penalty in the NFL, came back into the NFL, had an opportunity to play for the team I grew up rooting for, the Philadelphia Eagles. I think a lot of people were very mixed about that. But hey, if you still have the ability and you're still good enough to play in the NFL, certainly that is something that you've paid your debt to society, and now you're able to go and continue your profession. And Rick Dutrow should be allowed to continue his profession. Now, does that mean if I was an owner, I would be giving him my horses? Probably not, but I'm not going to stand in the way of him getting his trainer's license. That's for sure. But White Abarrio going to be there. So you also have Charge It, the Todd Pletcher horse that I think a lot of us think is supremely talented, but it looks lost every single time you watch him run. And this horse looks just so green all the time. And just it either isn't switching leads or is just all over the place. I mean, it actually looked like he regressed a little bit last time out in terms of just weaving all over the track coming down the stretch. So he's a super talented horse, but you just never know what sort of result you're going to get out of him, quite frankly. Dr. Shivel coming in from the West Coast. That's exciting, I think. Jamie Ness obviously has bringing Repo Rocks, who has found new form under him, up to the Met Mile. And then the horse that will inevitably be 30-1 and hit the board, Hoist the Gold. I'll already tell you that's my value play in the race because Hoist the Gold always hits the board and is always undersold. So that's a horse I'm excited to see run, and obviously a really big spot for him on the Met Mile. But that's going to be, I think, a really fun race. But let's talk a little bit more about the Acorn Stakes. That field was released, highlighted by, of course, the Kentucky Oaks winner, Pretty Mischievous, coming back on that 5 weeks rest, just like a lot of the boys are doing. Ran in the Belmont Stakes, now coming back, ran in the Kentucky Derby, coming back for the Belmont Stakes. Pretty Mischievous doing the same thing, ran in the Kentucky Oaks, coming back for the Acorn. Super, super talented filly, one that I have a lot of respect for. She was my value play in that Kentucky Oaks. That fairground circuit seemed to be the strongest. I also think the fact that Hoosier Philly came back and ran such a really big second place effort in the Black Eyed Susan only continues to elevate that stature of that fairground circuit for the 3-year-old females. So Pretty Mischievous coming back. You have a horse like Darth Vader. A lot of people are very interested in this horse being trained by George Weaver. Horses had a little bit of a different training tactic, not showing as much speed, taking a nice and easy approach. Maybe is not going to try to gun for the lead. He's going to learn how to maybe stretch out a little bit more. That was one of my concerns with Darth Vader, is maybe that course is a little too pace dependent and being a little bit more too forward. And so I'll be interested to see that horse. I like Darth Vader a little in this sort of a race. Money's Gold, the other Todd Pletcher horse, is going to be, listen, she's super talented. She beat some state restricted races in very impressive fashion down in Florida. She did not look great last time out at Churchill Downs, although you could make the argument, and that was obviously on the Oaks Derby undercard. That was, maybe Irad Ortiz Jr. did not really use her speed as much as he should have. And I'm always going to be a proponent of, when you have a horse that is that naturally gifted and fast, holding that horse back, I just don't like to do it. I understand you don't want the horse to just run a 21-second opening quarter mile. I understand that. But you got to use your speed. And if you don't use your speed, you bring everybody else back into the race. And I felt like that's kind of what happened last time with Money's Gold. So we'll be interested to see what sort of ride we get there in the Acorn. Then you have the other Todd Pletcher horse, Frosty O'Toole, going to be coming back here. It's an interesting horse just because Gambling Girl, who ran second in the Gazelle, came back to run really well in the Kentucky Oaks. So maybe that New York circuit wasn't quite that bad. That was a nice performance from Gambling Girl to run second there. So some of the New York group is obviously going to be up there. Frosty O'Toole, Occult, and Cheetah Booty. Occult and Cheetah Booty are both Chad Brown horses. And what I will say is, when I was in the paddock before the Gazelle, those two looked absolutely outstanding. Chad Brown can get a horse to look great. He gets him ready, that's for sure. But neither of them really fired. I mean, Sheeta Booty finished a decent enough third, but a Colt finished fifth or sixth that day in the Gazelle. It just didn't really show it. And it'll be interesting to see how these two run. Sheeta Booty might like the one turn mile on a 16th a little bit more. A Colt, we'll see. I always thought a Colt would like more distance just because of how well she ran in the Busanda, but we'll see. But interesting field in the Acorn for sure. And then in the Just a Game, you only have a 5-horse field with Spenderella, Wakanaka, in Italian, Speak of the Devil, and New Year's Eve. But if those are the 5 horses racing, I'll watch that race every single time. Spenderella, obviously the super talented Grand Motion filly, coming back, had raced last time out, losing to Fluffy Socks. That was the first time out for Spenderella in nearly 8 months. And so you would expect for there to be a little bit of a better effort this time, next time out. Wakanaka, hard knocking Bill Mott horse, who I think always turns in a really solid effort. Obviously, the favorite, maybe it'll be somewhere between Spenderella or In Italian. In Italian goes to that front end and just goes all the time and can just fly up on the front end. And when nobody presses her, she's pretty hard to track down and beat. And I have been trying to beat this horse for it feels like the last year and a half. And I'm successful once in a while, but more often than not, she proves me wrong. I really like Spenderella a lot, but listen, In Italian, again, she's got that running style where she just gets up on the front end. And looking at this group, who's really going to push her? I mean, Wakanaka certainly isn't. I doubt Speak of the Devil will. Maybe New Year's Eve will. The Brendan Walsh horse with the blinkers on maybe goes a little bit more to the front and presses In Italian. Although in a 5-horse field, I just have a hard time seeing it. So if In Italian can get up there and get comfortable in the front end, she's proven to be very, very difficult to track down, and particularly up in New York. So listen, a Spenderella is going to have her work cut out for her. I do see that as a little bit more of just a 2-horse race between those two, who are likely going to be the top 2 choices and the top 2 favorites in this one. Speaking of the Devils, Philly, I've just never really fully embraced. I just don't think she's quite at the same level of some of the other Chad Brown horses. New Year's Eve, I like Brendan Walsh a lot, but this was a horse that I feel like is sometimes in over her head against this level of company. Obviously had a big win 2 years ago, not this past, well, I guess last year you would say, in 2021 or 2022, I should say, on the Kentucky Oaks Day undercard. But like I said, I think it maybe is a little bit of a cut below the rest. Now, the biggest news coming out of Belmont over the past week is not about racing. It's not about the card. It's not about who's going to be racing and not on Saturday. It is video yet again of Forte stumbling and tripping while training for the Belmont Stakes. Of course, if you remember, Forte took a very famous and infamous misstep that was recorded ahead of Kentucky Derby. The Kentucky veterinary crew decided that he was favoring that front right leg and decided to be a veterinary scratch as a result of an abundance of caution. We see yet again the final workout before the Belmont Stakes, and Forte goes out, and you see yet again that front right just give in and just slip and take another misstep and trip. Now, listen, some people are hand waving this. Nah, it's not anything. Richie Migliori, who I have a ton of respect for, obviously. Richie goes, we're making a little too much out of this. I know a lot of people are going, it's just a trip. It happens. You're right. It does happen. I've been around horses enough to know trips happen all the time. And some horses just trip more than others. A little bit like humans. I'm one of those humans. I trip more than others. Okay. I'm also not trying to run in a race next week because I know I trip more than I should. And I probably would trip coming out of the starting gate. But it's just an ongoing point of concern for Forte. And I know a lot of people looked at that last workout, thought Forte maybe was getting pushed a little bit more and was not necessarily enthralled with that last work before the Belmont. Like I said, we see the trip. Is it nothing? Is it something? We'll see. Obviously, Chad Brown or Todd Pletcher, Mike Rapole, all going to try to do the right thing. Okay. And they're going to try to take care of this horse. And Obviously, Rapole very much so wants to get another Belmont. He wanted a Kentucky Derby this year, understandably so, as an owner. But, it is concerning to see the horse have the same issue kind of over and over again. And some people are, jumping to conclusions about it's a neurological defect, et cetera, et cetera. It's, all these other issues. And we don't know because we're not around the horse every single day to be able to know what its mannerisms are and how it normally acts. But it's not a great look. I'll just say that from an optic standpoint, having a horse trip 3 days before the Kentucky Derby and get scratched as a result of the misstep because he's favoring his front right. And now you see the exact same thing happen a week before the Belmont Stakes. It doesn't give you a ton of confidence in Forte necessarily. Now, some of you in the comments are going to say, listen, Forte is going to win by 5 lengths. And maybe so. Maybe you're right. But he feels like a little bit of a riskier proposition now than he did even a week ago. So we'll see. But those are the latest updates for the Belmont. Now, that was a lot of other news, but let's get to race recaps. But there's a lot of racing to recap here, not just in the United States, but abroad as well. We'll start at Churchill Downs. That final week of racing, as I'm recording this, has gone off without incident. Thank God. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. That was wonderful. I was sitting on pins and needles, kind of hoping everybody was going to be okay this final weekend of racing at Churchill. It looks like everybody is going to be all right. But let's talk a little bit about the races on Saturday. Gunite returning to the United States, returning in big fashion to win a stakes race over Bango, over Tejano Twist, over Sibelius, who looked completely cooked, although Sibelius and Strava linked up on the front end and went 21-3 on the front end of a sprint. Well, you're going to fade. And the Gunite had a beautiful trip right behind those two. Bango, I thought, ran really a big race because he was a little bit closer, actually, than Gunite was, and still managed to get there and hold up for second place. Tejano Twist, as always, comes charging to close a little bit at the end, but very impressive effort from Gunite back here in the United States. Always a sprinter I think we all root for and like a lot. In the Arlington Stakes, which was a little bit later in the card, Set Piece for Brad Cox comes back to get another big win. Didn't necessarily finish the way a 3-5 shot you would think should win. Won by about a length over Get Smokin', who ran a heck of a race. Get Smokin' ran, I'm not going to say Get Smokin' ran a better race than Set Piece, but Get Smokin' at 15-1 on the morning line nearly took him gate to wire and nearly managed to do that and kind of put him to sleep a little bit and then pull away. And so that was a really great effort from Get Smokin', who held on for second place there in the Arlington Stakes, but ultimately Set Piece gets the job done at 3-5. And that was a recurring theme at Churchill over the day on Saturday. A lot of chalk, almost all chalk. I believe none of the 3 rolling pick 5s paid out more than $90. I want to say the highest pick 5 paid out $88. And I want to say the lowest paid out like $33. I mean, it was just obscene how much chalk there was at Churchill. I mean, you really had to construct extraordinarily skinny tickets if you were going to turn any sort of profit at Churchill on Saturday. But Set Piece gets that one done. And then in the Blame Stakes, Rattle and Roll gets the job done. And really gutty effort, too, because coming around for home, it looks like Rattle and Roll is stuck behind a wall of horses, and he's on the inside rail. That's a trip I typically absolutely hate because the rail never opens up when I need a horse to be able to get through, it feels like. But Raylu Gutierrez and Barbara Road does not make things comfortable either, because Rattle and Roll tries to get through that rail, and Raylu, to his credit, a lot of jockeys are kind of let that rail open up a little bit. Raylu really tried to hold his line and did not let that much room in that rail, but he managed to kind of get through a little bit of bumping, nothing DQ worthy or anything along those lines, but a little bit of bumping, but it was a tight spot, and it kind of forced Rattle and Roll to kind of re-engage a little bit more and finally got through. But by the time that happened, Call Me Fast had gotten the jump and had gotten out in front of everybody. But Rattle and Roll just grinded them down and managed to get to the line first and beat Call Me Fast. I got to say, Ken McPeak's got 2 very nice horses in this older handicap division with Rattle and Roll and Smile Happy. And I think those are 2 horses that I felt were extremely overhyped last year as 3-year-olds on the Derby Trail. I remember the very infamous quote that Ken McPeak had about Smile Happy, that they were going to need to bring a bear to beat him at the Bluegrass. And indeed, Zandon apparently is a bear in addition to being a horse, because he beat him rather easily at the Bluegrass. So I think a lot of people have their laughs, self included, at Ken McPeak on that one. But listen, he's kept these horses racing. They've raced well after the Derby prep circuit and after the Derby. They've gotten back on the right track, had a little bit of a layoff in between seasons, has come back, and have both looked very, very, very good. So, listen, when we talk about this older handicap division, Rattle and Roll, Smile Happy, two of your better horses in that division right now, certainly making a name for themselves. We saw some horses earlier in the year, like a Stiletto Boy, like a Defunded, like a Last Samurai, making some noise. Now you're really seeing Rattle and Roll, Smile Happy taking some of that shine from that division. So something certainly to keep in mind, and congrats to Ken McPeak on a big weekend there for him with Rattle and Roll. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier in passing is the proliferation of graded stakes racing and what that has done to the concentration of quality in our sport. This past week, on Friday and Saturday, we had not one, not two, not three, but four. That's right, four graded stakes turf races routing for 3-year-olds. Fantastic. So rather than having concentrated fields that might be a little bit larger and feature multiple great horses running against each other, everybody kind of pick and chose which one they wanted to go to. So you had the Penn Mile on Friday. Okay. Then you had the Jersey Derby at Monmouth. You also had the Pennine Ridge at Belmont. And then you had the Audubon Stakes at Churchill Downs. 4 stakes races for 3-year-olds on the turf, routing. What are we doing? I mean, come on. And the thing is, I really like this 3-year-old turf division a lot. There's a ton of talent. And so everybody did get a really nice horse in their race. You go up to Penn Mile, and Major Dude gets the job done up there as the favorite in that race for Todd Pletcher, as he should have. But that was a good effort there for Major Dude to get a graded stakes win under his belt on the turf. Then you go to the Pennine Ridge, and Chad Brown gets one across in Kalik, who upsets Far Bridge and Silver Knot for Charlie Appleby. That's a really interesting one I'm going to come back to in a second. But then at the Jersey Derby, you have Talk of the Nation, who gets run down at the last second by Boppy O. And then at Churchill Downs, Web Slinger, who was also 3-5, just like Set Piece, manages to win that race as well and do it pretty easily. Won by about a length and a half, but I never was really pushed that hard coming down the stretch to win. Now, listen, there's a couple of interesting things to talk about in some of these races. One, let's go back to the Pennine Ridge. And by the way, shout out to Acacia Courtney, who was my guest on, and I still call her Acacia Courtney Clement, who was my guest on Capping the Card for Belmont this week. She was fantastic. I mean, she and I teamed up on a few really big hits, and I managed to get a few big hits late in the card as well. But she was all over Kalik in this Pennine Ridge, when I think a lot of people, like myself, was on Silver Knot or Far Bridge. But ultimately, Kalik takes him gate to wire. I mean, just beautiful front-running ride, and manages to get the job done and hold off Far Bridge and Silver Knot. Silver Knot is an interesting one. Charlie Appleby is not running quite as dominantly as he has over the last couple of years in the last few races. I mean, listen, his horses are still hitting the board every single time. So, fade at your own cost. But he's had some very short-priced horses who have not won recently. Obviously, Silver Knot, you had one, I'm now blanking on the name of the one, who ran a couple weeks ago, who was an overwhelming favorite, who also did not particularly fire well on the turf. And then obviously you had Modern Games finishing second at the Maker's Mark Mile. So, Applebee's hasn't been getting home quite as much as you might expect. Now, some of that is, I don't think he's sending over his best. And then the other part of it is, I've mentioned this before, when you see him bring over William Buick, that typically means we mean business. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't bet Appleby horses when William Buick's not riding them. But when William Buick's coming over, they mean business. And they're trying there's a concerted interest in that particular horse. That's something I usually do pay a lot of attention to with him and with Aiden O'Brien. When Aiden brings over Ryan Moore or something like that, when they bring over their top jockeys with them to ride in the United States, that tells you, okay, it's go time now. So that was something. But the real story from this is Farbridge, who some people are going to say Joel Rosario gave that horse a terrible ride. Some people are going to say that horse looks like an absolute handful to deal with because Farbridge was really, Rosario was really pumping at him and trying to get him to go. And I thought he was cooked because, he was dropping back and Rosario's trying to get him to go and the horse just is not responding. And I'm thinking Farbridge is done. And this is around the far turn. And I'm thinking this horse is cooked. And all of a sudden he goes on the inside and it does seem that he only likes to give a big run on the inside. He doesn't like kicking out. And so once he got on that rail, suddenly, boom, he takes off and he makes this huge run and re-rallies out of nowhere and nearly gets up for the win, but gets second place. But that horse, there's something wrong, not wrong physically, but there's something they got to train out of that horse a little bit. That horse is still really green. This is the last 2 times out that horse looked done and then got on the rail and produced a huge inside rally. Did it down at Churchill Downs last time out. Now did it at Belmont this time out. Very interesting to see. Obviously, 2 consecutive second place finishes in graded stakes races is not a bad thing, but as a horse that you feel like there's more talent there and it just is maybe not being realized. And I don't know if it's a matter of training. I don't know if it's a matter of the ride. I don't know if it's just a matter of the trip that the horse ended up taking, if it just wants to really be covered up on the inside. And that's where you need to have this horse positioned. And this horse cannot be on the outside. But something certainly to keep in mind as we look at Farbridge continuing to run. And then, listen, Talk of the Nation in the Jersey Derby, that was an interesting one as well, because that was obviously a horse that was very, very hyped, that got scratched at the gate at Churchill Downs last time out in that same race that Farbridge was in and that Webslinger ended up winning. But Talk of the Nation, Paco Lopez aboard, some interesting things there. You could tell that horse was very, not rank, but very keyed up early in the race. Wanted to get at the lead, was really pulling at the bridle, was really pulling at the bit, and wanted to go. And Paco was really using everything to hold the horse back because there are 2 horses in front of them that were going really fast. I think they went 46-1 for the opening half. And so Talk of the Nation was right behind that pace. So he was humming along pretty well too. They turn for home. He gets clear. And you think, okay, Talk of the Nation has got this thing done. All of a sudden, Bapio comes flying up on the outside. I don't know if Paco got a little too arrogant with the horse or a little too nonchalant, but I do feel like Paco didn't necessarily realize Bapio was coming at quite the pace he was until it was a little too late, because the nature of the ride all of a sudden changed pretty dramatically when Paco all of a sudden looked over his shoulder and realized, oh crap, I really have to push Talk of the Nation more, and really started going back to the whip suddenly to try to get him to go. So I don't know if it was a matter of, listen, Talk of the Nation was just a little too close to those early fast fractions and just lost, just didn't have it coming for home and was already spent, or if it was a matter of Paco maybe, like I said, not giving that horse nearly as aggressive of a ride down the stretch as he would have needed, considering Bapio was running. But Bapio, it just came flying late, as you would expect when you set that sort of a fast pace up front. But he was the only other one to really make a move. So congrats to Bapio on a big win. Talk of the Nation, still a very talented horse, obviously. And then Webslinger winning the Autobahn. That was awesome too, because Webslinger, talk about a turnaround. This was a horse, if you watch This Week at Stable Duel with myself and Gino Picola and Barry Spears, we were giving this horse out as like a value play horse to use in Stable Duel like 3 months ago in like listed stakes races down at Gulfstream Park, that we were like, oh, this is a really good horse. It's going to be like 8-1 on the morning line. Next thing you know, he's 3-5 in a graded stakes race at Churchill Downs and winning with ease. Now back-to-back graded stakes victories for Webslinger. Seems like this horse has really figured it all out. So congrats to him. And it's always great to see a horse that was one time a long shot that now is just filled with confidence and going off and winning these big time races. So like I said, congrats to him. Now overseas, there was also some huge action over in Epsom. Obviously in England, you had the Derby, you had the Coronation Cup. In the Epsom Derby, you had Augusta Rodin for Aidan O'Brien and Ryden Moore get the job done. This was a horse that ran down a huge long shot late. King of Steel, who, by the way, 66-1 finished second place. King of Steel, sweet Jesus, that's a big horse. For a second, it gave me a flashback of Rock Hard 10, who is still to this day the biggest horse I've ever seen run in a race. I mean, Rock Hard 10 looked like a different species of animal compared to everybody else on a certain level. So King of Steel, huge horse, but Augusta Rodin managed to get by him, and a beautiful ride by Ryan Moore, bounced back from a 12th place effort at the 2000s, the 2000 Guineas before at Newmarket last time out. That was over very soft ground that day. So Augusta Rodin gets back on firmer turf, manages to get the job done. And this is one that I think a lot of people really root for, not just because of Aiden O'Brien and Ryan Moore, connections that even most casual North American racing fans know, but this is one of the final progeny of Deep Impact, great turf Japanese horse. And Deep Impact, this was part of his last crop that he sired, was Augusta Rodin. And he only sired, I believe, 10 horses in that last crop. So Augusta Rodin kind of feels like this very special horse, a little bit of the way we think about Arrogate progeny right now, as we see a horse like Archangelo headed to the Belmont Stakes. We kind of cherish those horses that have those great connections for a legendary horse and a legendary sire like Deep Impact. And listen, Augusta Rodin, you can't ask for much better breeding. Deep Impact up top, Dan by Galileo underneath. I mean, come on, this horse can run for a horse might still be running. I mean, this horse can run for days. But Augusta Rodin, a horse I really liked last year quite a bit. I saw him win a few races last year and couldn't be more impressed. And congratulations to Aiden O'Brien and Ryan Moore on a big win in the Epsom Derby. Now, the other big effort from this past weekend was at the Coronation Cup, and that was Emily Upjohn for John and Thaddy Gosden with Frankie Dettori aboard. Frankie with just a beautiful ride and just a tremendous move from the back of the pack for Emily Upjohn, who I feel like Frankie kind of snuck up and got the jump on everybody. Nobody realized that Frankie was all of a sudden going to push this horse and accelerate. And all of a sudden, she went by the entire field. And now, granted, it was only, I think, a 6-horse field, but she went by the entire field in about 8 strides and went from last to first in the blink of an eye and was able to just open up. I will say Westover ran a huge race, I think, for second. Really was the only horse to even remotely be able to keep up with Emily Upjohn, and then a massive gap back between second and third. So congrats to Emily Upjohn, congrats to the Gosdens and Frankie Dettori on that big win for them. And that was a nice bounce back, of course, last year in the Oaks, the Epsom Oaks. Emily Upjohn stumbles at the start, finishes second that day, comes back a little bit of redemption here to win the Coronation Cup. And then, of course, you have over in Japan, you have Songline winning another brilliant Grade 1 performance just the other day. And the big news here, this is, of course, the great Japanese turf horse that we've seen defeated Sadashi again, but defeated a bunch of the other boys there. And Songline has a brilliant turn of foot. It was one of those races when you watch the replay, you thought, oh, they're going to get away on the front end. And all of a sudden you see Songline coming down the center of the track, and that turn of foot just gets to you at the end, and Songline ends up being able to put them away. But the reason I bring this up is the connections after the race have said Songline headed toward the Breeders' Cup Mile, coming over from Japan to Santa Anita to run in that Breeders' Cup Mile. That's a big commitment. And yet again, another indication when you hold these sorts of Breeders' Cups on the West Coast, you're going to get these Japanese horses coming over in a more regular basis. Songline, file that one away for November in the Breeders' Cup. All right, folks, that will do it for this episode of I was going to say Capping the Card. It's the Win Play Show. I'm doing so much, I get them all crisp up in my head. But I'll do it for the Win Play Show. Make sure to press that subscribe button here on YouTube. Make sure to like this video and comment below. Make sure to give me a follow on Twitter at the handle @FailToMenace. Listen, friends, we got you covered for a great week of racing, and leading up to the Belmont Stakes, going to be a lot of excitement. I'm going to be joined by David Aragona for a couple of videos. That's going to be a lot of fun. Might have a few other special guests lined up throughout the week as well. Until next time, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you that it's now post time.